Welcome to K-Drama for Sleep, where your favourite K-dramas turn into soft, soothing stories to drift off to. Tonight's story is about Mr. Sunshine, a young boy who escapes to a foreign land only to return as a soldier caught between duty and love, in a time when a nation is on the edge of change. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe so you can fall asleep to more of your favourite K-drama stories. So get comfortable, relax your mind, and let the story gently carry you into sleep. The year is 1871. Korea is still called Joseon, a 500-year-old kingdom clinging to the edge of a world that is about to stop being kind to old kingdoms. The young king, Gojong, sits on the throne in name only. The real power belongs to his regent, a proud old man who believes the sea will protect him from anything he refuses to look at. And on the horizon, American warships are already steaming toward the coast, carrying a diplomatic mission the regent has decided to meet with cannon fire instead of tea. Inland, far from the smoke that is about to rise off that fort, a 9-year-old servant boy named Eugene is carrying a pile of firewood across a noble's field. He stops because a blackbird has cut across the sky, and he tilts his head to watch it pass. An old nobleman scolds him. "Live with your eyes on the ground," the old man says. "For a servant, the higher you look, the shorter your life." The boy nods as though he has heard the words before. He keeps walking. He will not spend the night in that house. Before sunset, his master decides over wine that he wants the boy's mother. The boy's father overhears. By morning, the father is being beaten to death in the courtyard while the mother is dragged out to watch. She does something no one expects. She seizes a hairpin, holds the master's pregnant daughter-in-law hostage, and flings a small gold ornament into the dust at her son's feet. "Run, Eugene," she begs. "Run very far. Run so our sacrifice means something." Then, when her hands begin to slip, she throws herself down a well rather than be recaptured. The straw shoe on the surface sinks slowly as the boy, already running, hears it fall. He clings to the coat of a passing American missionary at the edge of the port. The missionary is trying to buy pottery from a quiet potter named Hwang Yun-san, a man with watchful eyes who, after refusing the boy a bed for the night, finally relents and asks the missionary to take him across the sea as the price of the slaughtered Joseon people. The boy begs for passage with everything he has, which is one small gold ornament and one enormous promise to work. The missionary, annoyed and pitying and vaguely ashamed, takes him. On that same day, on the coast not far from them, American cannons open fire on a small Joseon fort. In the smoke, another boy, a gunner's son named Jang Sung-gu, watches his father rise to defend the flag and die on his feet. Sung-gu will survive. He will carry the grudge quietly into his adult life. He will become one of the best marksmen in old Joseon, and eventually the man who teaches a noblewoman how to shoot in the dark. Among the Joseon survivors taken prisoner by the Americans is a limping young Joseon collaborator named Lee Wan-ik, already smiling, already calculating who he can sell his country to next. This is a country, in those years, where nobles ride past servants without lowering their eyes, where a butcher's son, a boy named Gudong Mai, whose family will be beaten to death by their own villagers before he is dragged in chains to Japan, is considered lower than dirt. Where a few years later, in a Tokyo safe house, a one-day-old baby girl will be handed over the wall of a secret passage to a stranger and told to live, while her mother, a resistance fighter named Hee-jin, fires her rifle through a splintered paper door at every shadow that comes near it, and her husband, Sang-wan, bleeds out in an alley a few doors down, betrayed by Lee Wan-ik's gold. The baby is named Go Ae-shin. Neither of her parents will live to see her grow up. Neither of them needs to. 30 years pass. 30 years of a small Joseon boy learning English by being beaten for not knowing it. 30 years of a cold New York alley and a music box in a shop window playing What Child Is This? Until a starving boy sat down against the wall and wept because he had no idea what child the song meant. 30 years of cutting off a servant's braid with a borrowed knife on a dock and dropping the hair into the water and deciding, without anyone to witness the decision, that he would become an American or die trying. He becomes one. The missionary who took him in renames him Eugene, the noble and great being. He grows into Captain Eugene Choi of the United States Marines. He fights in Cuba, pulls a wounded superior named Kyle Moore out of a ditch at El Caney, and earns himself a Washington handshake from Theodore Roosevelt, who tells him, in that famous cheerful bark, to speak softly, carry a big stick, and set off to Joseon. Roosevelt does not know, because it does not interest him, that the soft-spoken officer in front of him had been born in the country he is casually redeploying him to. Eugene arrives in Hanseong a stranger in his own skin. The streets he ran from barefoot now have electric lights strung between the eaves. Trolleys rattle past palace walls. Coffee is poured in porcelain cups at Glory Hotel. And yet the nobles still ride past servants without looking down, and the servants still bow to the dust as though nothing has changed underneath the new lamps. The country he left has become a country with new clothes and an old spine, and he cannot decide whether that makes it better or worse. His first problem is a bureaucratic one, or so it seems. An American advisor named Logan Taylor has been selling Joseon intelligence to Japan, embarrassing the United States, and Kyle Moore, now his commanding officer, still battered, still treating Eugene like the son he never quite allowed himself to have, wants the problem handled quietly. Eugene begins pulling threads. The threads lead by accident to a familiar pottery shop. He does not recognize Yun-san at first. Yun-san, for his part, studies the foreign captain's face a little longer than strangers do, and says nothing. What Eugene wants is simple. Finish his assignment, earn his transfer, close out his tour, and leave Joseon forever. What stands in his way is a single black figure on a rooftop one cold night. Logan Taylor has just been killed by a bullet through the window of a geisha house, a bullet Eugene himself was preparing to fire until someone fired first from the opposite rooftop. A masked gunner in a dark cloak is already running across the tiles when he sees her, and the two of them skid to a stop on opposite roofs, with guns raised at each other, separated by a narrow alley and a held breath. They both realise at the same moment that the other is not the enemy. They lower their weapons a half-inch. Pursuers flood the street below. They run in opposite directions. Down on the street, Eugene catches sight of her again later, unmasked now, in the crowd gathered to watch the new electric lamps come on. A train rattles past between them. When it clears, she is looking straight at him. She is not afraid. That is the part that undoes him. A noblewoman in silk in full public view stares at the man she half nearly shot on a roof 20 minutes ago and does not blink. He asks her, in the most offhand way he can manage, where she lives. She tells him, politely, that she is not in the habit of telling strangers anything. Her carriage arrives. Her servants collect her. She's gone. On the ride home, she replays the rooftop moment in her head and tries to make it add up. If he were a comrade, she thinks, he would have fled. If he were an enemy, he would have fled faster. Neither explanation works. She files him away as a problem to be solved later. Across the city, meanwhile, another homecoming is underway. A man in a black coat strides through the marketplace with 2 swords at his hip and a Japanese-trained gang at his back. His name is Gu Dongmai. He has come back as the leader of the Musin Society, a Yakuza faction now embedded in Hanseong like a blade in a wound. The vendors flinch from him. He drinks it in. He is returned specifically to kill every villager who once beat his parents, and then to keep going. Then Dong Mai sees her, a noblewoman walking through the market in bright silks, laughing at something her maid said. "Go, Ae-shin." He does not recognize her at first. Something in his face goes very still. Years ago, when he was a starving beggar in an alley, a small noble girl in fine clothes crouched down, pressed a coin into his palm, and told him quietly to live. She had not been afraid to touch him. She had not even hesitated. He has kept that coin ever since. He has kept it the way some men keep a wound. By the end of that first week, Eugene has seen Ae-shin 3 times and pretended each time that he has not. The American who came to leave is already beginning to lose the argument. Something has started to tug at him that he cannot yet name, and it has the shape of a mask and the voice of a noblewoman who, the first time they speak face to face, asks him what his English name actually means. The question hanging over the city now is the one Eugene will not let himself ask aloud. Who is the woman in the mask? He tells himself he only wants to know because of the stolen weapons and the dead advisor. He does not believe himself. Ae-shin, meanwhile, has her own problem. She cannot stop thinking about the face of the man by the train tracks. She sits in her grandfather's house under a punishment she has earned by once again getting caught hiding foreign newspapers inside her classical text. Her grandfather, Go Sa-hong, stern and white-haired and tired in ways his granddaughter only sometimes notices, has ordered her to copy out the Confucian classics until her hand cramps as penance for caring about the outside world. She copies them all night. She does not stop being curious about the outside world. She knows, as she writes, that something in the grandfather's eyes softened a little when he lectured her, and that his softness is not weakness but fear. She does not know yet why her grandfather is afraid for her. The audience knows. Long before Ae-shin was born, her parents were righteous army fighters who died on the same day in a single quiet catastrophe, betrayed by a comrade in the pay of a young Lee Won-ik. A one-day-old baby was handed across a secret passage to a trusted friend and told to be kept alive. That baby was Ae-shin. The old man who raised her has spent every year since trying to build her a world in which the word righteous army never had to be spoken. He is failing, and he knows it. What he does not tell her, because telling her would end his last illusion, is that he has already begun to make arrangements. He has summoned a quiet man named Yang Sung-gu, the gunner who, as a boy, watched his own father die on the fort wall when the Americans came, and asked him to train Ae-shin to shoot. "I will not ask you to protect her," grandfather says, pouring Sung-gu a cup of rice wine. "Please teach her to protect herself." Sung-gu accepts without smiling. The scar on his right hand moves in the lamplight. Ae-shin's training begins the next week in a ruined hillside hideout above the city. Seung-gu walks her up the slope until she cannot breathe. He walks her back down. He does it again the next day and the next, until one morning she reaches the top before he does. Only then does he put a rifle into her hands. "Once you shoot," he tells her, "your position is revealed, so you must already know how to run." She nods, because the sentence makes sense to her in a way no Confucian passage ever has. Meanwhile, Eugene meets Ae-shin formally the way the upper classes meet, across a careful social occasion at her family compound. She's polite, curious about English, quick to pretend she's never touched a gun in her life. He is polite, curious about her curiosity, quick to pretend he has never wondered what her eyes look like from 6 inches away in the dark. Between them, grandfather watches the American officer with the flat, unreadable patience of a man who has outlived 3 kings and has stopped being surprised by anything except kindness. What Ae-shin wants is to finish her errand for the resistance and go home unseen. What stands in her way is that this foreign soldier seems impossibly to have understood something about her that no one else has ever noticed. What she chooses is to test him. She asks what a handshake is. He takes her hand and shows her, a little too slowly. Neither of them lets go for a heartbeat longer than politeness allows. She files the feeling away like a loaded cartridge, and so does he. Dong Mai, watching from a distance, sees the American officer lingering near the Go compound and makes a decision he will later regret. He will wait. He tells himself he is patient. He tells himself the coin she once gave him buys him time. None of that is actually true, but the lies keep him standing. At Glory Hotel, a new figure steps fully into the story. Her name is Kudohina. She's the Joseon-born widow of a wealthy Japanese lord she did not love and did not mourn, and she runs the hotel like a woman who knows exactly how much every favour costs and exactly which ones she intends to collect. Hina speaks fluent Japanese, sharper Korean, and serves Western coffee with a smile that could cut glass. She notices Eugene checking in. She notices the way he flinches very slightly at the sound of the little music box behind the front desk, a small wooden thing that plays What Child Is This? She does not ask him why. She files that away too. Later that afternoon, a drunken Japanese customer in her restaurant grabs one of her waitresses by the wrist and demands to know her price. Hina crosses the room without hurrying. She breaks a porcelain plate against the table, uses the shard to cut the man's grip open at the knuckle, and tells him, in a voice pitched just low enough to be heard by every diner in the room, that the waitress is more precious to her than the plate. The man leaves. The waitress stays. Eugene, who has watched the whole incident from his corner, accepts a handshake from Hina a moment later, and then, noticing she's bleeding, hands her a handkerchief instead. They recognise a shape in each other they cannot yet name. 2 exiles. 2 survivors. In a dusty pawn shop down a side street, 2 more people enter the story. Il-shik and Chun-shik. Bickering former slave hunters who lost their trade the day Joseon abolished slavery and reinvented themselves on the same afternoon as pawnbrokers, forgers and private investigators. They are broke. They are earnest. They squabble about rice prices while burying things under the floorboards that would get them shot. They are the comic relief of the story, and they will also, when the time comes, be the ones who quietly hold the whole underground together with their 4 stubborn hands. By the end of this stretch, everyone is circling the same question from a different angle. What is Joseon worth, and who is willing to pay? Eugene does not have his answer yet. He only knows that every time he tries to leave this country, it pulls him back by a thread he cannot see. The relief of those first careful meetings does not last long. The next morning, Ae-shin is summoned to the American legation for questioning about the night of the assassination. Eugene himself conducts the interview. They sit across from each other in his office, both of them perfectly composed, both of them lying. He lifts his hand to cover the bottom half of his face. She follows suit, almost without thinking. They both think in the same instant of 2 masked figures on opposite rooftops staring at each other through gun sights. Neither of them says so. Eugene asks very carefully who she really is. Ae-shin answers just as carefully that a foreigner has no business knowing such things. She turns the question back at him. Are you Hwalbindang? Are you Righteous Army? He answers, in a voice so quiet it is almost a confession. If I were, would I be on your side? Neither of them gets a real answer from the other. Both of them get something more useful, which is the certainty that the other is not going to tell. His investigation tangles him further with the grizzled gunner himself a few days later, He meets Shungu by accident at a dockside inn, where Eugene is staring at a plate of chicken soup he cannot bring himself to eat. He has been having a memory all day, the memory of hiding under a straw mat in a small boat the night he was smuggled to America, cold and hungry and crying for a mother he already knew was dead. Watching Shungu across the room devour a bowl of the same soup with uncomplicated appetite makes Eugene feel more like a foreigner in his birthplace than any conversation ever has. He pushes the bowl away. He walks out. Their paths cross more directly in the back room of Eugene's office a little later. Shungu has traced the investigation to its source and walked in to kill the foreign officer asking too many questions. The two men nearly kill each other right there before Eugene casually reveals that he has already disassembled the firing spring of the pistol Shungu just aimed at him. Shungu blinks, lowers the weapon, half annoyed, half impressed. "You're just like your student," Eugene says mildly. Shungu does not quite flinch, but something in his posture shifts, and from that one small slip of expression, Eugene is now certain of something he had only suspected. The woman on the rooftop has a teacher, a cause, and a name, and her name is Ae-shin. Noblewoman and sniper, the same person. Eugene sits with that knowledge for a long time after Shungu leaves. Ae-shin, for her part, is not idle. She learns through her own servants, a fierce maid and a sickle-wielding farmhand, both of them righteous army to the bone, that the American officer has been asking about her. She decides to test him the way he tested her. She arranges an accidental meeting at the river. They walk. She asks him about English words, innocent ones, to see what he will do with them. He teaches her, reluctantly, carefully, as if each word cost him something. She watches his face while he talks. There is a moment halfway through the walk when she realizes he already knows what she is. He has not turned her in. He has not even warned her that he knows. He's simply walking beside her in the sunlight, carrying her secret in his chest like a stone. What she wants in that moment is to ask him why. What stands in her way is the entire history of her country and the entire history of his. What she chooses instead is to keep walking, greater than something enormous passes between them without a word. They both feel it. Neither of them can take it back. That evening, in his hotel room, Eugene pulls out the small gold ornament his mother threw at his feet the day she died. He's carried it in the lining of his bag across 2 continents and 3 wars. He turns it over in his hand and thinks about the girl by the river. The shape of the ornament and the shape of her hairpin are almost exactly the same. He sets the ornament down carefully as if it might burn him. A few days later, a ship comes in from Tokyo. Off it steps a beautiful, sad-eyed man in a perfectly tailored Western suit, holding a pocket watch he keeps winding for no reason. His name is Kim Hee-sung. He is the heir to one of the oldest and wealthiest noble houses in Joseon. He's also Ae-shin's arranged fiancé, a man she has never met, and a man who's been deliberately avoiding coming home for years, and he is returning now only because his family has run out of patience. We get one small flashback to understand him. Years ago, his grandfather, a ruthless old man who built the family fortune by squeezing tenant farmers off their land, gave young Hee-sung an expensive Western pocket watch and told him, with the pride of a patriarch, to never limit himself and never be satisfied. The watch, Hee-sung learned on the way out of the room, had been paid for with the forced sale of a farmer's last rice field. He has been winding the watch ever since, unable to throw it away, unable to forgive it. He has also been drinking a great deal and smiling a great deal and writing love letters to no one in particular, because he has no idea what he's supposed to do with a life that was built on top of other people's lives. His homecoming turns the whole social chessboard. His family name is old enough that his grandfather's name alone used to make grown men, Bo, what is not public knowledge, and what only a handful of living people understand, is that Hee-sung's family and Eugene's family are bound together by an old, ugly rope. It was Hee-sung's grandfather, long since dead, who owned Eugene's parents. It was Hee-sung's grandfather who gave the order that beat Eugene's father to death in the courtyard and drove his mother to the well. The current head of the house, Hee-sung's cowardly father, is the same young nobleman who, as a boy, once pushed a small, pleading Eugene away and refused to intervene, and Hee-sung's gentle, quiet mother, the woman with a silk scarf she never removes, is the pregnant daughter-in-law whose neck Eugene's mother pierced with a hairpin to buy her son 30 seconds of mercy. The scar is still there under the silk. Hee-sung knows none of this yet. Eugene knows all of it, and Eugene moves first. One night he walks into the Kim family compound with his service revolver in his hand and the gold ornament in his pocket, and he confronts Hee-sung's father directly. He does not shout. He simply asks where his parents were buried. The cowering nobleman admits, with a kind of shame that has had 30 years to settle into the bones, that he has no idea that all the slaves on the estate were buried together in an unmarked pit, the way one buries dogs. Eugene does not shoot him. He puts the revolver away. The mercy is worse than the gun would have been. The two men, Eugene and Hee-sung, meet for the first time in the lounge of Glory Hotel a day later, and they like each other. That is the terrible part. Hee-sung is witty in a self-deprecating way Eugene is not used to. Eugene is cautious in a watchful way Hee-sung finds fascinating. They end up drinking together. Hee-sung, who has a gift for reading what people will not say, begins almost immediately to suspect that this American officer is more Joseon than he is letting on. He does not press. He simply files it away with the same careful curiosity with which he files everything. Back at the legation, Kyle Moore watches his protégé's face over a cup of cold coffee and frowns. He has seen this look on young men before. It is the look of a man who has just found a reason to stay in a country he came to leave. Kyle does not say anything yet. He will let Eugene find out on his own what that reason is going to cost him. What Kyle wants, quietly, is for the boy to be happy. What stands in the way is every single thing in Joseon. What Kyle chooses is to pretend, for now, that he has not noticed anything at all. Elsewhere in the city that same night, the other pieces of the board begin to move. Lee Won-ik, now a minister of agriculture, now circling the emperor like a vulture circling a sick animal, receives a coded message from his Japanese handlers that the Russians are sniffing around the peninsula. He pours himself, a drink and smiles. Wars are good for men in his line of work. Emperor Gojong meanwhile sits alone in the palace with his small remaining circle of loyal advisors. Minister Lee Jung-moon, quiet and unshakable, and the aged minister Song Young, who once carried a one-day-old Ae-shin out of a burning Tokyo safe house in the fold of his coat. Neither man speaks about the past. Both of them live inside it. The morning after Eugene's late-night visit to the Kim compound, Hee-sung formally calls on Ae-shin at the Go household. He has prepared flowers for his fiancée. He has prepared a small witty speech about his late arrival from Tokyo and his apologies for not coming sooner. He delivers neither. Ae-shin meets him in the inner courtyard, looks at the flowers, looks at his face, and does not take the bouquet. She stares at him without expression. He laughs nervously and asks whether it is the flowers she dislikes or him. She does not answer. She asks him, almost, kindly, to please let her go. She does not love him. She cannot love him. She's asking him, noblewoman to nobleman, to release her from the arrangement their families made when they were children. Hee-sung laughs, not cruelly, but with a soft, surprised delight. He refuses, not out of spite, out of a dawning, inconvenient curiosity. He's been bored for so long, and she's the first thing in years that has not bored him. He wants to know who she really is before he lets her go. Meanwhile, the resistance makes its next move. A woman must be smuggled out of Hanseong, a geisha named Suwa, secretly a comrade, who's been gathering information from high-ranking Japanese clients at Wawolu and can no longer stay without dying. The plan is complicated. A false trail will be laid at the port to draw Dongmei and his Musin gang toward a ship that never sails. The real escape will happen by train. Ae-shin, in her black mask and cloak, will provide sniper cover from the rooftops during the diversion. What Ae-shin wants is a clean operation and a safe departure for a comrade. What stands in her way is Dongmei, who realizes halfway through the day that he has been sent on a false chase and begins doubling back at a dead run. Eugene, quietly, also involves himself. He has figured out the plan, and he uses his American status to escort Soar past Joseon checkpoints under Kyle Moore's unwitting cover. Kyle, for his part, is getting much better at not asking questions. "Let's go," he says cheerfully, quoting a line from the bad poem he's been trying to write for months. On the rooftops above the port, Dongmei climbs up to intercept the unknown sniper. He moves fast. He catches her in his sights as she sprints across the tiles. For 1/2 second, he has a clear shot at the masked figure. Then he sees the eyes inside the mask. He knows those eyes. They belong to the small noble, girl who once pressed a coin into his starving palm. His hand goes still on the trigger. He fires anyway, but he aims low. The bullet catches her in the leg. She falls hard, rolls, crawls away into a back alley, leaving a small red smear behind her. Dongmei reaches the spot a minute later, kneels down beside the blood and stays there too long, as if he is praying at a grave he has dug for himself. The next day, limping carefully beneath her long skirts, Ae-shin crosses paths with Dongmei at the train station. He blocks her way. She stares him down with a calm that does not match her bleeding leg and says, with terrible quietness, "I could kill you if I had to. You could not kill me. It is not a boast. It is a diagnosis of his entire life." Dongmei realizes she has seen all the way through him, and something small and private inside his chest cracks. What he chooses in that moment is to step aside and let her pass. The cost is that he will spend the rest of the story trying and failing to reassemble the pieces of whatever she just broke. That night, Ae-shin takes refuge in the medicine shop where Eugene, not entirely by coincidence, is waiting. He has figured out what happened. He is furious in the careful, silent way men are furious when they have no right to be. She is exhausted. She offers him a deal, soldier to soldier, her secret for his silence. He accepts, not because of the deal, but because he cannot help himself anymore. She asks him, trying to change the subject, what comes after handshake in English. He hesitates. He mutters the answer almost to the floor, "Hug." She walks into his arms before he can take it back. He freezes for a 1/2 second the way a man freezes when he has been struck by lightning, but does not yet know if he is hurt. Then, slowly, very slowly, his hand comes up and rests on the back of her head. They stand there in the dim shop surrounded by drawers full of dried roots. He smells the faint medicinal bitterness of the air, and underneath it the ink and paper smell of her hair. And underneath that, something he cannot name that makes him want to stop being 30 years old and start being 9 again just so he can have more time. For the length of one held breath, the country they're both about to die for becomes, very quietly, a place worth living in too. Love, it turns out, is harder than Ae-shin expected. She tells Eugene so the next time they meet, bluntly, the way she tells him everything. He offers her an out. "We can stop any time," he says. She refuses. "Since we can stop any day," she answers, "let's not stop today." This becomes, in its way, the thesis of their whole relationship. Every day they stay in it is a small, stubborn act of rebellion against an enormous impossibility. She is a noblewoman, engaged to another man. He is a foreign officer of a country that once threatened hers. They have no future. They choose each other one day at a time, and they do not talk about the second day, because talking about the second day would mean admitting there might not be one. Around them, Hanseong tightens. The foreign minister position becomes a death sentence. Whoever Go-jong appoints to it is assassinated within the week, because Lee Won-ik has decided the post must be his and is willing to turn the chair itself into a grave to force the emperor's hand. Minister Lee Jung-moon, quietly heroic, tries to hold the shadow court together through sheer endurance. Sungu is eventually manoeuvred, half against his will, into accepting the position of a head of palace security. He does not take it to protect the emperor. He takes it because it places him close enough to the throne to kill the man on it, if the country ever requires that sacrifice. This is the kind of calculation people are now making in Hanseong over breakfast, and Eugene, meanwhile, has a private reckoning of his own to finish. Through careful investigation, through Guan-su, his nervous comical Joseon clerk who's been steadily metamorphosing into his closest friend, he has confirmed what he long suspected. Grandfather once had 2 sons, both dead. One died in the anti-Catholic riots. The other was Sang-wan, Ae-shin's father, killed in Tokyo with his wife Eugene on the same day. The traitor who engineered that betrayal was a young Lee Won-ik. 2 old griefs, 1 new face, all of them now sitting across a dinner table from the woman he loves. He confronts Hee-sung's mother in private. He does not shout. He does not threaten. He simply lays his mother's gold ornament on the table between them and tells the quiet, scarred woman across from him that he will keep it because it represents the price of his mother's life. She recognizes it. The blood drains out of her face so quickly it looks painted. She reaches up instinctively to touch the silk scarf at her throat, where a 30-year-old scar still waits under the fabric. Then he tells her something even harder. He tells her that he will not forgive her family ever, but he will not burden Hee-sung with her sins, because those sins do not belong to Hee-sung. He has watched enough of Hee-sung now to know that the young man is trying, in his strange, beautiful way, to become a better person than his name. Eugene will let him try. He asks Hee-sung's mother to support her son in that journey. Then he stands up and walks out. It is the first fully adult, generous thing we see Eugene do for someone who has not earned it, and it is the moment we understand finally the kind of man he has quietly decided to become. His mother once threw her life onto a hairpin so he could run. He has spent 30 years running. Now, in a small room in Hanseong, he has started for the first time to stand still. While Eugene is choosing not to burden Hee-sung with his family's past, Hee-sung is busy uncovering it on his own. He is not stupid. He's begun to notice the way his parents flinch when Eugene's name is mentioned. He reads his grandfather's old ledgers late at night in his hotel room, and he finds the entries he's not supposed to find. A runaway slave boy named Eugene, a dead father, a mother who jumped into a well. He puts the ledger down very carefully. He walks to the window. He stands there a long time. He also does something else with the ledger that the audience will only fully appreciate later. Flipping through the rest of it, he discovers that his grandfather meticulously recorded every favour ever owed to the family by corrupt officials across the country. Police chiefs, post office managers, magistrates, anyone the old man had ever bribed or blackmailed. Debts older than Hee-sung himself. Hee-sung's smiles are small, private, almost dangerous smile. Then he begins, one by one, to collect on them. His method is characteristically Hee-sung. He walks into the office of the chief of police with his pocket watch ticking in his pocket and a polite smile on his face, flips open the ledger, points at the name inside and asks in a voice pitched just high enough to be misheard as charming for the money his grandfather is owed. The chief of police, horrified, pays. He walks into the post office and does the same. He walks into a restaurant and is intercepted on the way out by an old farmer who throws a bucket of water at him and asks bitterly whether the Western pocket watch is still working after all these years. The watch his grandfather stole the man's field to buy. Hee-sung does not argue. He stands in the street dripping wet and accepts the water as though it were an inheritance. Eugene, passing by, witnesses the whole thing. He offers Hee-sung his handkerchief. Hee-sung refuses it with a small bow. One of them is bound to feel pity eventually, he says lightly, and pity is also a kind of affection. He walks home in his soaked clothes, shivering, smiling. Eugene watches him go and feels, for the first time, something like protective fondness for the man he's supposed to consider a rival. What Hee-sung wants is to be a good man despite being the grandson of a monster. What stands in the way is every piece of privilege he has ever enjoyed. What he chooses is harder and stranger than anyone would have guessed from looking at him. He takes all the collected money and very quietly sets up a secret printing operation in the back of the pawn shop, an underground press, a paper that will document the crimes of the powerful and the sacrifices of the forgotten. If his family name is going to mean anything to history, he has decided he wants to be the one who chooses what it means. Then, one bright afternoon, Dongmei is shot in broad daylight outside a candy shop. The bullets come from above, from a rooftop across the street, fired by a low-level righteous army informant named Sang-mok, whom Dongmei had, uncharacteristically, once spared. It is a terrible piece of irony. The one act of mercy of Dongmei's adult life becomes the bullet in his side. Hee-sung, of all people, is the one who finds him bleeding on the cobblestones and drags him to a hospital. Dongmei, coughing blood into a cloth, refuses anesthesia because he does not trust the Japanese doctor Hina has already warned him about. He orders the surgery done while he is fully awake, biting down on a strip of leather, and stares at the ceiling through the entire extraction because he has decided he is not allowed to die until Ae-shin acknowledges him at least one more time. Hina intervenes to save his life through a careful piece of blackmail. She possesses a forged autopsy report on her own late Japanese husband, a document so dangerous she's been saving it for exactly the right occasion, and she uses it now to force the doctor to keep Dongmei breathing. We get, around this moment, the first quiet reveal of who Hina really is. Hina's father is Lee Won-ik. Her mother was a poor Joseon woman he discarded to marry upward, who died lonely and abandoned somewhere in the north. Hina has spent her entire adult life quietly gathering evidence against her own father. The forged autopsy report is only one of her weapons. It will not be the last. Dongmei wakes some hours later to find himself somehow still alive. He looks up at the ceiling and does not know whether to feel grateful or insulted. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Ae-shin's grandfather launches a public scholars' protest in front of the palace. Old men in pure white robes with their hair untied kneel on the stone steps, lay ceremonial axes beside their knees, and beg the emperor to refuse Japan's latest currency scheme. It is an ancient, formal, almost ritual form of resistance, a scholar's last recourse. The axe beside the knee is not decorative. It is an invitation. If our appeal is unworthy, strike here. The men doing it are old and frail and know perfectly well what is about to happen to them. It is nearly the bravest thing in the whole series. What grandfather wants is for the emperor to listen. What stands in his way is an entire royal court that has already been bought. What he chooses is to kneel in the cold anyway for hours until his knees bleed through his white robes. The emperor, surrounded by advisors who whisper into his ears about rebellion and embarrassment, orders the protesters arrested. Japanese soldiers, not even Joseon ones, drag the scholars off to prison. Grandfather is taken with them. He does not resist. He looks up at the palace gate one last time, and, in the ancient formula of a loyal subject, murmurs a blessing on the ruler who has just condemned him. The blessing comes out of his mouth the way water comes out of a well bucket. Automatic, lifelong, already mourning itself. Ae-shin watches the arrest from a distance, her face unreadable, her hand tight on the wrist of her maid. This is the man who raised her, the man who hid her parents' truth to give her a childhood. The man who still believed, somewhere behind his exhaustion, that a good argument could save a kingdom. Watching him kneel on that stone and be treated like a criminal is the exact moment Ae-shin stops hoping Joseon can be saved politely. Across town, in the back of a pawn shop, Hee-sung begins printing the first extra edition of his nameless newspaper. Friday, March 21st, the headline reads, "At the Emperor's command, Go Sahong and his scholars have been arrested for protesting the currency exchange." The newspaper boys run the extra through the streets by afternoon. Villagers crowd around to read. A small, unofficial newspaper has just begun to tell the truth about a kingdom that no longer will. Hee-sung, inky-fingered and quietly proud, has found the thing he was put on earth to do. Il-shik and Chun-shik, watching over his shoulder, bicker about whether the ink is too dark and then, at the same moment, realise they are both crying. By the time the ink is dry on Hee-sung's first extra, a column of soldiers waving the rising sun flag is marching into Hanseong, led by a Japanese general named Mori Takashi. Eugene recognises him at once, and the recognition is terrible, because they were neighbours once in America. Years ago, when Eugene was a young Marine posted stateside, Takashi was a smiling young Japanese officer studying abroad who borrowed sugar and practiced his English on the same porch. Back then he was charming. He is still charming. But in the intervening years he has been learning Korean carefully, privately, because he has been promised Joseon as his colony, and he does not intend to arrive unprepared. "My English stopped improving," Takashi tells Eugene when they meet again, with a small polite smile. "I was learning another language instead. I thought I might need it." Takashi is the most unnerving villain the story has yet produced, more frightening than Wanik, because Wanik is merely corrupt, while Takashi is a gentleman. He bows politely, he quotes poetry, he apologises with grace when his soldiers misbehave, and he will, without a flicker of expression, order a village burned. At Glory Hotel, Hina hosts a welcome reception for the Japanese brass. What she wants is to observe them, memorise their faces, and quietly decide which ones to destroy. She briefs her young waitresses in the kitchen beforehand. She tells the girls to serve the Japanese guests in English, not Japanese, an act of defiance, so subtle the guest will not even register it. "They will not understand what you're saying," she murmurs, smiling, and that is the point. What stands in her way is one drunk officer who grabs her wrist and drags her into his lap at the dinner table. What she chooses, without raising her voice, is to challenge him to a sword duel on the dining floor in front of all his superiors. The duel is fast and vicious. Hina is not formally trained the way the officer is, and for a long moment she is losing. Then she spills a bottle of sake across the polished floor on purpose, lets his own weight take him down onto the slick wood, and puts her sword against his throat in front of 40 watching men. Takashi himself steps in at that moment, all smiles, all bows, all murmured apologies, and restores order. In Japanese, he praises her skill. In Korean, after noticing the faintest Joseon accent under her Japanese, he introduces himself by his real name. Hina smiles at him the way a woman smiles at a snake she intends eventually to skin. Meanwhile, Japanese soldiers are raiding the English language school where Ae-shin has been secretly studying, on the thin pretext that the American missionary instructor, a woman named Stella, is a spy. They seize Stella. They demand to interrogate all her students. Ae-shin, unflinching, declares in perfect English that she is one of those students and will accompany them willingly, but only for a proper Joseon interrogation, not a Japanese one. Eugene arrives just in time, using his American uniform like a shield to put himself bodily between Ae-shin and the soldiers and escort her back to the safety of the legation compound. Takashi watches him do it. Takashi does not intervene. Takashi does, however, tuck away the fact that the American captain speaks Korean to the noblewoman, the way a husband speaks to a wife. At the legation, over a shared cup of coffee Ae-shin does not know how to drink, Eugene tells her she will be safe behind American walls for at least one night. Ae-shin, with her maid sitting quietly in the corner, admits that her hidden English notebook, the one she has been studying from for months, is full of the same name over and over. She's too embarrassed to say whose name. Her maid cheerfully overshares that it is Eugene's. Ae-shin goes red. Eugene, trying not to grin and failing, leans forward and asks to see the notebook. Ae-shin clutches it to her chest as if it were a loaded weapon. For about 4 seconds, in the middle of a city that is quietly being occupied by foreign troops, the two of them are just two people who are embarrassed and happy. That borrowed safety does not last. On a frozen river under a winter sky, Eugene and Ae-shin meet for what both of them know is going to be a hard conversation. He has decided to tell her the rest of his story. He tells her about the courtyard, about the well, about the noble who once told a small servant boy that the higher a servant looks, the shorter his life. He tells her about the gold ornament. He tells her, for the first time aloud to anyone in this country, his real name. He watches her face as he speaks. He sees very briefly the flicker that always passes through the faces of nobles who have just realized they are talking to someone who used to be property. It is small. It is involuntary. It is also unmistakable. Eugene smiles with no warmth and asks her quietly whether she is shocked by the cruelty of the men who once owned him, or by the fact that he was the kind of person who could be owned. He does not wait for her answer. He asks her another question instead. Who lives in the Joseon you are trying to save? Can butchers live there? Can slaves live there? She does not answer that one either. She cannot. He tells her gently that they cannot walk side by side anymore. He turns and leaves her on the ice. She watches him go and does not call him back because she understands with a clarity that hurts that he is right and she has nothing yet to say. For days afterward, she does not eat properly. She replays the conversation over and over and finds, to her horror, that her grief is mostly for him and only secondarily for herself. She has spent her whole life believing she was different from other nobles. She is realizing in the worst possible way that she has only ever been a noble who happened to like newspapers. She finally seeks him out on a snowy night, after walking home from her English lesson repeating the new words she has learned: moonlight, miracle, mister, stranger, sunshine. She sees him across the trolley tracks in the falling snow. He sees her too. They stand on opposite sides of the track for a long moment as a trolley clatters between them, the way they once stood on opposite sides of a passing train the very first time they met, and when the trolley clears, neither of them has moved. He crosses to her. He does not say much. He notices her hands are cold and gives her his gloves. She tells him, with the steadiness she's been practicing all week, that she was wrong, that she had assumed, without ever asking, that he must have been a noble like her, that she had never questioned a single one of her own privileges until his story made her count them. She apologizes, not the elegant aristocratic apology a noblewoman is taught to give, a real one, the kind that costs something. Eugene listens. He puts the gloves on her hands himself, slowly, finger by finger. He tells her that the world is full of disparities of class and feeling and history, that neither of them invented those disparities, and that the most either of them can do is meet honestly inside them. He reminds her that the lower classes, her servants, the innkeeper, the errand boys, also live in the Joseon she wants to save, and that her fight is more useful to them if she stays alive to fight it. He tells her to keep walking while he takes a step back. It sounds like a goodbye. It is not quite. Behind them on the same snowy street, Hina happens to be passing on the trolley. She sees the two figures across the tracks and reads them in one glance, the way only a woman who has spent her whole life watching couples can read couples, and her face softens with something that is not envy and not pity but might be a little of both. She rides on into the night without disturbing them. Eugene has made a quiet decision in the days since the snowy reunion. He is going to leave Joseon. He tells Emperor Gojong directly, in a private audience arranged through Hina's careful diplomacy. The Emperor offers him an official Joseon position, a way to stay and fight openly. Eugene declines. "I am not a Joseon citizen," he explains. "I am leaving so that I do not hurt someone." The Emperor accepts the answer with the tired grace of a man who's been hearing too many people refuse to save him. Eugene begins making his quiet farewells. He visits Yun-san at the old pottery hut and asks for a single night's lodging, the same words he used as a starving child 30 years ago. Yun-san, gruff as ever, redirects him to the inn across the river until Eugene tempts him with a bag of imported American beer. They sit on the floor of the small hut and drink. Eugene finally tells Yun-san directly that he knows, that he was the boy, that he never forgot, that he is sorry he could not repay the kindness sooner. Yun-san, for his part, finally stops pretending. He tells Eugene that the debts are all paid, that every favour Eugene has done in the last several months for the resistance, knowingly or not, has wiped the slate clean. He invites Eugene to spend the night anyway. Eugene, who has not cried in front of another human being in maybe 20 years, sits in the doorway tying his boots and quietly cries. He visits Seunggu next, on the practice mountain, to return some borrowed cartridges and to admit without saying so that he is leaving. Seunggu accepts the cartridges and warns him, gently, that Ae-shin will not stop fighting just because Eugene is no longer there to worry about her. Eugene already knows that is exactly the part that hurts. He tracks down Ae-shin's two loyal servants, the maid and the sickle-wielding farmhand, and treats them to a generous meal of black bean noodles. They glower at him on principle but devour the food without pride. Halfway through the bowl, the maid lets slip, almost in spite of herself, that Ae-shin has been crying into her pillow nearly every night. Eugene receives this news without flinching, but his hand stills on his chopsticks for a long second before it moves again. He hands the servants a small parcel and asks them to give it to Ae-shin after he is gone. The servants accept the parcel suspiciously and spend the rest of the evening arguing about whether its contents will spoil if they wait too long to deliver it. Inside the parcel is the music box, the same one that played What Child Is This in a New York alley. the one that has followed Eugene across 2 continents and 3 wars. Lee Won-ik, meanwhile, smelling the shift in the wind, moves faster. He begins orchestrating a plot to discredit the loyal minister Lee Jung-moon and drive him from the Emperor's side entirely. He plants forged letters. He bribes interpreters to mistranslate the Emperor's private correspondence in ways that make Gojong sound pro-American, pro-Russian, pro-anyone but Japan, depending on whichever audience he wants to enrage that week. Eugene and Seung-gu, working from opposite sides of the palace wall, barely manage to counter the plot in time. At one point, Minister Lee himself, calm, precise, a scholar first and a soldier only by necessity, corners the worst of the bribed interpreters in an empty room and kills him personally with his own sword. He does it without enjoyment. He does it the way a gardener trims a diseased branch. In the scramble, Eugene is forced to show more of his sympathies than is safe. Won-ik, watching all of this from a corner of the court, finally begins to suspect that the American captain is not nearly as neutral as his passport suggests. He does not accuse Eugene yet. He begins instead to build a slow file. That night, Ae-shin discovers the music box hidden on her practice mountain when she walks up to clear her head. The familiar tune plays, and her maid, who is with her, finally confesses that Eugene gave it to her as a parting gift. Ae-shin grabs the music box and for a long moment simply cannot move. She has been preparing for him to leave. She has not been preparing for the actual sound of the song meaning goodbye. In the middle of all that careful, quiet warfare, Ae-shin and Eugene steal one more quiet day together. It is not exactly a date. It is an errand disguised as a day off, with her loyal servants keeping watch from a respectful distance. But it is the most ordinary thing either of them has ever done together, and therefore the most precious. He rents a small rowboat. He rows it badly. She teases him for it. They fish from the boat, and when she asks him, in English, what the word for fish is, she mishears him and insists the word must start with a P. He corrects her. She pouts. He spells it out for her. F-I-S-H. And the memory of her annoyed little face in the afternoon light will, much later, break the heart of everyone who hears this story. They bring the fish back to the medicine shop and try to cook them. Eugene brags that he is very good at everything involving boats. Ae-shin, delighted, pretends to believe him. They eat the fish slightly burned over a small charcoal fire. They sit close together in the dim room and do not say the things they are both thinking. Around the same time, Hina is conducting a much more dangerous operation of her own. She's been patiently tracking the noblewoman who sold the names of the Emperor's secret couriers to a foreign agent, a beautiful, bored, greedy woman named Mrs. Kang, who has been romanced by a French legation secretary named Leo in exchange for information. Hina slips into Won-ik's house in the dark of night to retrieve a critical document and runs straight into another masked figure on the same errand. The other figure is Ae-shin, on her own resistance mission. The two women stalk each other through Won-ik's hallways, trade blows in near silence, and finally pin the masks off each other's faces. They stand in stunned recognition. The hotelier and the noblewoman, the widow and the sniper, they each hold a different document the other does not need. With the unspoken understanding of women who have just realised they have been on the same side all along, they trade. Hina takes the autopsy report on her late husband. Ae-shin takes the bribed interpreter's reports and slip away in opposite directions before Won-ik's guards return. Out in the street, Hina is intercepted by Won-ik's assistant Duk-moon and nearly caught until a shadow moves behind him and knocks him out cold. The shadow is Dong-mai. He has been watching Hina's back without telling her. He pulls her into the safety of the crowd and makes some flirtatious joke about how she's become the apple of his eye. They walk together into the rain and part at a corner without saying goodbye, because saying goodbye out loud would make it true. Ae-shin, meanwhile, also has a quiet, harder conversation with Eugene before her day is over. She tells him, in plain words, that she thinks about her own death every single time she goes out on a mission. That is why she shoots so accurately and runs so fast. It is not bravery. It is arithmetic. She's done the math and found the answer terrifying, and she has decided to keep shooting anyway. She tells him she does not want to live like a flower. She wants to live like a flame. Bulkot, she says, in Korean, a fire flower, a thing that blooms by burning and does not last. Eugene, hearing this, realizes he has already gone further into the flames than he meant to go, and that he is not going to step back out. In an imaginary letter to Joseph, the long-dead missionary who rescued him as a boy, he says quietly, "Joseph, I think I'm completely ruined." It is the closest thing to a prayer Eugene has said in 30 years. The brightness of those stolen days does not last. At the Joseon Military Academy, where Eugene has been quietly teaching, the young cadets have begun to suspect that their training is not just training. Jun Young, the sharp boy whose forged enrollment papers Eugene saw through on the first day and forgave anyway, pieces together the hints Eugene has been dropping. The extra drills at dawn, the emphasis on shooting while running, the way Eugene keeps saying if you're discovered, flee. If you are captured, die, as though quoting a holy book, and confronts his instructor privately. He wants to know if they are being prepared, secretly, to fight. Eugene does not quite answer. He simply gives the boy a long look and tells him to keep training. Then he gives him a small practical lesson. Balance a pebble on the muzzle of your rifle and pull the trigger without knocking the pebble off. The boys of the academy yard spend the next week trying. All of them fail except Jun Young, who, on the 5th day, succeeds so cleanly that Eugene has to turn his face away for a second. Wanik, meanwhile, has been watching the academy with suspicion for weeks. He catches wind of the cadets' real sympathies through an informant, and he orders a brutal purge. On a cold morning, in the middle of a drill, Japanese-aligned officers march into the academy yard with a list of names. Several cadets are arrested on fabricated charges. Eugene is forced, in front of his own students, to stand at attention and watch boys he has trained be dragged away. He does not intervene. He cannot. Intervention would reveal him, and his revelation would doom everyone else. The cost of that restraint is written on his face as the cadets are marched past him. Junyoung sees the look, understanding it, hating it, and respecting it all at once. He salutes his instructor as he passes. A small, sharp, private salute that says, "I know what this is costing you, and I will not forget." Eugene does not move. He does not blink. But inside the closed fist at his side, something is shaking. This is the first time the show makes us feel, clearly and bone deep, what Eugene's uniform actually costs him. It keeps him alive. It keeps Ae-shin alive. And it forces him, again and again, to do nothing while his own people are taken away in front of him. Every piece of protection is also a chain, and Eugene is getting tired of how heavy the chain is. That night he sits alone in his office at the legation and looks at the photograph of his mother's ornament in the drawer, the small gold piece from a day long ago in a courtyard he has never really left. He writes a letter to Joseph in his head that he never sends. "I thought I had reached the end of the flames. It turns out I need to go one step further in." He closes the drawer. He goes to bed. He does not sleep. While Eugene wrestles with what His uniform costs him. Hina is finally putting her own long-prepared archive to use. She turns the forged autopsy report of her late husband into a weapon, aimed directly at the people who've been hunting her friends. She uses it to protect Dongmai from an execution order after Wonnik discovers, too late, that Dongmai has been helping Hina instead of Hina's father. She uses it to buy time for the Emperor's small loyal faction. She uses it like a scalpel. We learn, during this stretch, what Hina's marriage actually was. Her Japanese husband, Kudo, was 3 times her age and owned her in every sense the word allows. He beat her, with small delicate precision, in rooms with expensive wallpaper. The scars on her arms and shoulders are from him. When he died, of poisoning, from a cup of tea she did not exactly mix and did not exactly refuse to mix. Wonnik, her father, paid a doctor named Machiyama to falsify the autopsy so that Hina could not be blamed. The favour was not mercy, it was leverage. Wonnik has been holding that false autopsy over her head ever since, the way a man holds a collar. What Wonnik does not know is that Hina eventually commissioned her own forgery of the forgery, a second document that exactly matches the original except for a single subtle detail. A notary's seal that is not quite right. She has spent years arranging it, so that when the moment comes, she can produce her version first and make his version worthless. That is the game she's been playing since she was 20 years old, and this is the stretch of the story in which she finally begins cashing in. Hina also pays the pawnshop brothers to commission a small painted portrait of her mother, a Joseon woman she barely remembers, sold by Lee Wonnik to his Japanese business partners when Wonnik was climbing the ranks of Japan's colonial service. The woman died alone in a Japanese port city, probably of heartbreak, probably of worse. When the portrait is finally ready, Hina looks at it for a long moment, then tells the brothers to burn it. She has decided she does not need the picture. She has decided her revenge will be her mother's monument instead. Il-Sheikh, burning the painting in a courtyard that night, bows to the flames without quite understanding why. It is important by now to say what kind of woman Hina truly is. She's not a love interest. She's not anyone's sidekick. She's the quiet, exquisite, furious daughter of a Joseon woman who was sold and a Japanese man who beat her, and she has spent her adult life building a hotel, a network of informants, and a long, patient revenge. She does it all in a language that is not her mother tongue, in a country that never quite claimed her, behind a face that reveals nothing. When she finally picks a side in this coming war, the Joseon side, the losing side, she does it with no expectation of being remembered, and with no hope of surviving. Meanwhile, in the quiet of the Go household, Ae-shin's grandfather writes his will. He does it in secret. He does not tell her, but she notices the way his brush trembles on the paper, and the way he holds her a second longer when she leaves his room each night, and the way his gaze softens on her back as she walks out the door. She does not ask him what is wrong. She knows. The whole household seems to know. Time is running out in that house, and no one is willing to speak it aloud because speaking it aloud would make it arrive faster. A blessing from one grandfather, however, does not erase the sins of another. Hee-sung, long suspicious of his own family's past, finally reads the old ledger entries in full. He stays up all night. By dawn, he understands everything. His grandfather's orders, his parents' cowardice, the death of a woman in a courtyard, and the life of a boy named Eugene who grew up to become Eugene Choi. He reads the ledger a second time just to be sure. The ink has not changed, the names have not changed, the shame has not changed. He closes the ledger very carefully and walks straight to find Eugene. When the two men meet, Hee-sung does not make a speech. He simply stands up, bows and apologizes. Not for himself, but on behalf of a family name he has decided he is going to spend the rest of his short life earning back. The sins are not mine, he says quietly, but the name is, so the apology is as well. Eugene accepts the apology with a single nod. The two men shake hands. They do not become friends exactly. They become something rarer in this story and in most stories. Two men who respect each other without needing to like each other, and who will, if the moment comes, die for the same cause from opposite sides of the same room. From this point forward, Hee-sung's secret newspaper sharpens. He begins collecting names. He begins collecting photographs. He buys a camera, a rare and expensive Western toy, and he starts documenting things that should not be documented. The traitor ministers at their private banquets, the Japanese troops on the march, the quiet moments of righteous army fighters drilling in the woods, the mothers at the language school learning their letters, the children running errands for the resistance without knowing they are doing so. He hires exactly one person to help him, a young woman reporter named Yoon who's been scraping by selling gossip columns to a Japanese-controlled daily, and who, when Hee-sung offers her the chance to write truth instead of perfume ads, bursts into tears. He is building, without entirely realizing it, the historical record that a colonized country will need decades from now. He is building it with a pocket watch in his coat and a pressed flower from Ae-shin's garden in his wallet, because he is still in love with her and always will be. He also makes his hardest decision. He arranges a meeting with Ae-shin at the billiard table in Glory Hotel. He proposes a wager. Winner takes a wish. He sinks every ball with maddening casual skill, pockets the 8 last, and turns to her with a small, sad smile. "My wish," he says, "is that we end our engagement." Ae-shin stares at him. She understands what he's doing. He is the one being rejected, and he is pretending to be the one doing the rejecting, so that society will blame him instead of her. A broken engagement is a scandal a man can survive. It is a wound a woman wears forever. She tries to thank him. He stops her. "Be strong," he tells her gently. "The world will treat a woman with a broken engagement badly. Endure it anyway." It is the kindest thing anyone will do for Ae-shin in the entire story, and Hee-sung does it while smiling, so she will not feel sorry for him. That night, he burns the official marriage letter in a small brass dish in his hotel room. The paper curls into black petals. Somewhere across the city, in her own room, Ae-shin opens the book where she has pressed the dried flowers Hee-sung once gave her as a courtship gift, and she lets the dry petals drift one by one from her fingers onto the floor. Neither of them knows the other is grieving at that exact moment. Both of them are. A few mornings after Hee-sung's billiard table sacrifice, the news of the broken engagement reaches the Go household. Hee-sung's mother visits Ae-shin's aunt to formally apologize for the scandal that will now follow Ae-shin for the rest of her life. She removes her silk scarf for a moment as she speaks, and the long 30-year-old scar at her throat is briefly visible. "This is a flaw I have carried my whole life," she says quietly. "I understand what it is to live with one." The two older women bow to each other in the courtyard and end their family's promise, without raising their voices. Inside, Ae-shin and Hee-sung kneel together outside grandfather's room to face the consequences. Hee-sung tells her, lightly, that he already knew she loved someone else, that his real wish, the one he would not say at the billiard table, is just for her to be allowed to choose. Aunt and grandfather receive the news inside. Aunt urges grandfather to stay firm and hold the families to their original promise. Grandfather thinks for a long time. He thinks about Hee-sung's claim that he doesn't like Ae-shin. He thinks about Ae-shin's quiet certainty that she loves another. He thinks about the look on her face when she returned home wearing borrowed gloves on a snowy night. He decides, in the end, that he is too old to force a flame to live like a flower. He releases her from the engagement. He does it in formal, sparse language that breaks her a little, because she had not realized until that moment how much she had needed him to choose her freedom for her. Around the same time, Grandfather makes another decision he does not announce. He has known, for some weeks now, that he is dying. He's not sick exactly. He is just very, very old, and the prison cell broke something in him that the body cannot mend. He sits down at his low writing table and writes his will. He does it in secret. He places 3 things into a small wooden box for her. A letter in his own formal, beautiful calligraphy telling her the names of her parents one more time so that she will never forget them. A small dried pressed flower from the courtyard of their old Tokyo safe house, saved by Minister Song-young 30 years ago, and passed quietly to Grandfather the year Ae-shin was born, and the deed to a small mountain hideout, made out anonymously, because he has always understood what kind of life she was going to need, and has spent her whole childhood preparing the safe places for her to run to. A few days later, Eugene visits the Go household quietly through a side gate Ae-shin has arranged for him. He meets her grandfather for the first time in person. The old man looks at the American officer for a long moment and then, in formal, polished Korean, thanks him for protecting his granddaughter. Eugene bows so deeply his forehead nearly touches the floor. It is not a Western bow. It is the bow of a Joseon son, which is what, at the bottom of everything, Eugene has always been. Grandfather looks at the bowed back of the man in front of him and thinks privately that if the world had been different, this is the son-in-law he would have wanted. He does not say it. He does not have to. Eugene, when he straightens, sees the thought in the old man's eyes and accepts it as the blessing it is. That night, Grandfather dies in his own room, on his own mat. While Ae-shin is out on a small errand for the resistance, she comes home at dusk, to a silent house. Her aunt meets her at the door without speaking. The servants stand along the walls with their heads bowed. Ae-shin understands instantly. She walks to the old man's room by herself and slides the paper door open, with hands that are, for once, perfectly steady. She kneels by the mat. She places her forehead very gently against the back of his cold, papery hand. She does not cry at first. She thanks him in a whisper for raising her. She tells him she knows now what her parents were, and that she knows he hid the truth to give her a childhood. She tells him she is not angry with him. She tells him she will try, every single day of the rest of her life, to be worth the secret he carried for her. Then she cries. It lasts a long time. The funeral is a small, careful thing. Eugene comes as close as he dares. He stands outside the outer gate in the dark in his foreign uniform, because a foreigner cannot cross the threshold of a noble house in mourning. Ae-shin inside feels him there without seeing him. The gate between them is only a few steps across, and it is also everything, and neither of them tries to bridge it that night. His presence at the gate is enough. It is more than enough. It will have to be. In the weeks after the funeral, the political situation collapses further. Japan forces the emperor to sign humiliating new agreements. One it consolidates. Minister Lee Young-moon, the loyal advisor who's been holding the Shadow Court together with invisible threads for months, is assassinated in his own study. The killers are professionals. They do not leave a message. They do not need to. Sungu, inside the palace, realizes that his position as head of security is no longer a shield but a stage, and that his performance is almost over. He has known this was coming for weeks. He has already quietly arranged for the orphaned children at the language school to be relocated to safer houses. He has already said his goodbyes to the innkeeper at his old drinking spot. He has already cleaned his father's gun and left it next to his pillow. What he has not done is tell Ae-shin, because Ae-shin would come for him and he does not want her to. Eugene receives private, unofficial orders from his superiors back in America. His tour in Joseon is to be concluded. His government does not want its officers involved in whatever's about to happen here. If he obeys, he sails home to the United States, keeps his rank, and lives out the rest of his career somewhere warm. If he disobeys, he becomes a man without a country for the second time in his life. He disobeys. He does it quietly, without drama, the way Eugene does everything. He simply tells Kyle Moore over a bottle of something cheap that he is not going to board the ship. Kyle stares at him for a long time across the table. Then, characteristically, Kyle quotes the same broken line of private poetry he's been writing for months and never finishing. "Let's go," he says. It is Kyle's way of saying I understand. It is Kyle's way of saying I will cover for you as long as I can. It is Kyle's way of saying goodbye, because both men know that the cover will not last forever. Kyle pours them each another drink. They clink glasses without a toast. That same night, Eugene and Ae-shin meet in the medicine shop that has become their private country. She brings him a folded Joseon flag she's been sewing in secret. He brings her 2 plain rings he has had a Japanese-trained silversmith make for him. Simple bands of metal, no engravings, no ceremony. They exchange the rings without speaking. They do not use the word married. They do not need to. They slide the rings on and hold each other's hands in the dim shop, surrounded by drawers full of dried herbs, and for a long moment, in a country that no longer formally exists, they are the only 2 people in the world who know what this means. One of the first steps further into those flames takes them, briefly, to Japan. The resistance needs critical documents retrieved from a contact in Tokyo, and the only cover story that will get them across the border is an American officer travelling with his foreign wife. So Eugene and Ae-shin pose carefully as a married couple. Guan-su, now fully committed to the cause in his own flustered way, pulls the paperwork together and weeps twice while doing it, because he has realised that he is watching people he loves walk into something he cannot follow. For 3 days in Tokyo, they do almost nothing important. They walk. They eat food Ae-shin has never tasted. Soft white rice with pickled plums, sweet bean buns, miso soup so rich it makes her close her eyes. They sit on a bench in a small park and watch Japanese children play under cherry, trees that do not care who rules which country. They go one afternoon to the neighbourhood where Ae-shin's parents died. Ae-shin does not know the exact address. She only knows the ward. She stands at a street corner for a long time, looking up at the windows of ordinary houses, imagining which one of them might have held the small room where her mother fired her final gun. Eugene does not say anything. He just stands beside her and waits. When she's ready to walk away, she takes his hand. They pose, awkwardly and formally, in a small photo studio for a single black and white photograph. In the photograph, neither of them is smiling. Eugene is stiff in his uniform. Ae-shin is elegant and very still. But the old Japanese photographer, when he develops the plate under his red lamp, holds it up to the light for a long quiet moment before wrapping it. He can tell. He is old, and he has photographed a lot of couples, and he can tell that whoever these 2 people are, they love each other hard enough to be legible on glass. Back in Hanseong, while Eugene and Ae-shin are still in Tokyo, the Japanese general Mori Takashi steps fully into the larger story. He arrives at the Go family compound in person, leading a column of soldiers, ostensibly to investigate the language school. Eugene rushes back from Japan in time to interpose himself between Takashi and Ae-shin's household. The 2 men meet again for the first time in years. Takashi greets him in fluent Korean. My English stopped improving, he says with a small smile. I was learning another language instead. I thought I might need it. In the days after Takashi's arrival, his colonial administration tightens its grip. Arrests multiply. A list of suspected righteous army members begins to circulate through Japanese command. Ae-shin's name is on it. Eugene's name is beginning to be on it under a careful footnote. Hee-sung's name is on it under a fake alias that will not survive more than a few days of real scrutiny. Eugene is summoned to a private meeting with Takashi. The meeting is cordial. They drink tea from expensive cups in a room overlooking the palace. Takashi does not threaten him. Takashi simply tells him, in the same mild, friendly voice he might use to discuss the weather, that he knows Eugene has been helping the rebels. He says he knows about the medicine shop. He says he knows about the pawn shop. He says he has been choosing, for old friendship's sake, not to act on the knowledge yet. He adds, still smiling, that when the moment comes, and the moment will come, their friendship will not save Eugene's life. Then Takashi says something even worse. He tells Eugene, conversationally, that when Joseon is finally absorbed into the Japanese Empire, Eugene will be offered a very comfortable position in the new administration, a desk, a salary, a house. He will be able to live out the rest of his days in peace. All you have to do, Takashi says, is keep your eyes on the ground. Eugene thanks him for the tea. Walking out of that meeting into the afternoon sunlight, Eugene stops in the middle of the street for a long moment and looks up at the sky. It is the first time in the whole story we have seen him look up at the sky as an adult. The last time was when he was 9 years old, a small servant boy carrying a pile of sticks across a field, being told by a cruel old nobleman that servants should keep their eyes on the ground because the higher a servant looks, the shorter his life. Eugene now keeps his eyes on the sky for a long time. A passing cart driver shouts at him to get out of the road. Eugene does not move. He's decided, without making a big thing of it, that he is done keeping his eyes on the ground. Whatever time he has left, he's going to spend it looking up. A single cloud drifts past the palace tiles. He watches it go. Then finally he walks on. That same evening, Hee-sung's young reporter Yoon brings him the worst news yet. The post office manager who printed their papers has been interrogated. He didn't break, but the interrogation itself proves that the authorities are closing in. Hee-sung listens without interrupting. When she finishes, he picks up his pocket watch, winds it once, and smiles at her. "Keep writing," he says, "even if you have to write the last sentences in the ground." The closing in arrives faster than anyone expects. The righteous army suffers its first catastrophic defeat. A scheduled raid is betrayed from the inside by a jaded comrade who's grown resentful of Yunsan's leadership. Several of Ae-shin's comrades are ambushed and killed in a gully outside the city. Yunsan, the old pottery maker, discovers the betrayal only because Il-shik and Chun-shik, the pawnshop brothers, follow the jaded comrade one night and catch him stealing a letter from the network. Chun-shik kills him with a single sword stroke in the dark, and then the two brothers run through a forest at full speed to draw pursuing Japanese patrols away from the righteous army camp. They survive the night by pure luck and sheer lung power. They do not speak to each other for most of the next day because they are too shaken to joke. Seung-gu, inside the palace, is cornered after refusing to carry out an order that would have compromised the last shreds of the emperor's dignity. He chooses his ground on the stone steps of a side courtyard, fires until his pistol is empty, then draws his sword and dies the way his father died on the fort wall 30-odd years ago, defending a country whose rulers were already handing it away. As he falls, the audience is shown one last flashback of the boy Seung-gu watching his father die in the American cannon smoke and of the adult Seonggu raising a mere quiet cup of rice wine in an inn the night grandfather first asked him to teach Ae-shin to shoot. He is not afraid in the end. He's just very tired, and he has paid back every debt he thought he owed. Ae-shin learns of Seonggu's death from a courier in the street outside the medicine shop. She does not fall. She does not even lean. She puts her hand on the courier's shoulder, thanks him for running so hard to bring her the news, walks home the long way, closes the door of her inner room behind her, and only then allows herself exactly 3 minutes, she counts them, of grief. Seonggu was the man who taught her to shoot. Seonggu was the first adult who ever looked at her, as a child, and treated her as a soldier instead of a pet. Seonggu was family in every sense of the word that does not involve blood. Eugene finds her afterward. He does not ask if she's all right. He sits down beside her and waits. After a while she says, steadily, that she intends to keep using what Seonggu taught her until the bullets run out. Eugene nods because he expected nothing else, and because he loves her exactly because of it. Dong-mai too is having his final reckoning. His own Musin society brothers, sensing his divided loyalties, have begun to turn on him. A summons arrives from Japan ordering his return to answer for his conduct. He does not go. He sends back a letter whose exact contents we never see, and he begins quietly to prepare for a death he knows is now inevitable. He settles small debts. He pays the tarot card reader at Hwawalu one final visit. She turns a card for him, sees what it says, and begs him to stay indoors. He smiles at her with unexpected gentleness. The card is just catching up with me, he says. I've known for a while. Before he walks toward it, he finds Ae-shin one last time in the back street behind the pawn shop. He tells her her debt is paid in full. He tells her that she owes him nothing now. Then, with the only clean honesty he has ever managed in his entire adult life, he tells her that the insult he once spat at her years ago, calling her a spoiled noblewoman, had haunted him ever since. He had hoped she had forgotten it. When she admits softly that she never did, his whole face changes. I am content, he says, almost to himself, that I possessed one moment in Go-Ae-shin's life. He turns and walks away down the alley without looking back. Ae-shin stands very still in the dim light for a long time after he is gone, because she understands, belatedly, that she has just said goodbye to someone. The morning after that goodbye, Dong-mai walks to the port where his former Musin brothers are waiting to kill him. He does it in full daylight. He brings both his swords. He does not pretend to himself or to anyone else that he expects to come back as he walks. The camera of our narration lingers briefly on all the small street corners of Hanseong he has ever claimed. The candy shop, the taro stall, the dojo, the back alley behind Hwawalu, where he once knelt beside a drop of Ae-shin's blood. He's saying goodbye to all of it without a word. The Musin warriors are waiting. They drag the limp body of Yujo, his loyal second in command, to his feet, and taunt Dong-mai with it. Yujo had sailed to Japan looking for him, and had been caught. Dong-mai's eyes harden. He reminds himself out loud that he can still cut anyone who comes within reach. Then he runs into the fight. The fight is short, terrible, and very beautiful. He is outnumbered 8 or 9 to 1. He cuts through more men than should be physically possible for any single swordsman. He is stabbed, slashed, pierced in the side, cut across the back. He keeps going. At one point he laughs, a low, hoarse laugh with blood in it. Because he has just realised that his fortune teller was right that morning about the cards of death, and he finds it funny. Finally, the last Musin warrior brings a blade down across his chest. Dong-mai falls to his knees in the dirt. He looks up at the sky. He smiles a small, private, almost embarrassed smile, because he is thinking of a noblewoman who once, very quietly, admitted that his cruelest words had hurt her. I am a bad man, he thinks, as his vision begins to dim. I wanted her to forget those words, but when she told me she'd remembered, I was glad. I possessed one moment in her life. Then he dies. The story grants him one small spectral mercy. As the Musin warriors drag his body away by the wrists, we see, just for a second in a reflection in a puddle, a younger Dongmai walking off in the opposite direction, back into the sunlight, with the friends and the gang he had in the days when he still thought he might be able to just choose differently. The ghost gives the body one last glance and is gone. In another reflection, farther back, a much younger boy crouches in an alley holding a small coin a noble girl has just pressed into his palm. That boy smiles at nothing in particular and disappears too. In the pawn shop, Hee-sung's secret newspaper keeps printing, but the net is closing. He knows it. He's known it for days. He begins preparing an archive, burying chests of photographs and handwritten records and negatives in the ground behind the pawn shop, so that even if they kill him, the evidence will outlive him. He fires the young woman reporter he's been training, not because she's done anything wrong, but because he wants her to survive him. He puts his camera into her hands. He tells her to go somewhere safe and stay there. He shakes her hand once, very formally, and smiles his charming Hee-sung smile and makes her promise to come back for the buried chest one day. She cries. He does not. The next morning, Lee Won-ik overplays his hand at last. A long-planned resistance operation catches him alone in an isolated place, a private residence he keeps for meetings with his Japanese handlers, guarded by men Hina has quietly bribed into looking the other way. Eugene, Ae-shin and the pawnshop brothers converge in coordinated silence. The confrontation is not loud. Eugene does not make a speech. Ae-shin does not make a speech. They simply do what needs to be done together, and the man who once stood smiling beside an American general who bombarded Joseon's coast, the man who ordered the death of Eugene's parents through a chain of favors long ago, the man who engineered the Tokyo betrayal that killed Ae-shin's mother and father, the man who helped engineer the sale of Joseon to Japan, dies in a dark room on his own expensive carpet, surprised, at the very end, only by how ordinary it feels. Eugene stands over the body for a long moment. He does not feel triumphant. He does not feel clean. He feels, for the first time since he was 9 years old, that a weight he's been carrying his entire life has been placed down on the floor beside him. Ae-shin kneels briefly beside the body too. She does not look at the man's face. She looks at his hands because her mother once described those hands in a letter grandfather read to her years ago. Then she stands up and takes Eugene's hand, and the two of them walk out of the room without speaking. Hina has already left the building by the back door. She will not see the body. She does not need to. She's been watching Won-ik die in her imagination for 20 years, and the only part of this night she cared about was the part where she stopped being his daughter. The victory is brief. By the next morning, the Japanese have learned of Won-ik's death, and they respond with fury. A nationwide crackdown begins. Righteous army hideouts are raided. Couriers are arrested. The pawn shop is watched. Soldiers begin stopping anyone with calluses on their hands or ink on their fingers. The small, quiet network that has held so much of the resistance together for so long is unravelling in real time, thread by thread, village by village. Yun-san, the old pottery maker who once took in a running boy named Eugene and later grew into the steady spine of the whole resistance network, gathers his remaining people in a hillside camp and plans the only move he has left: a mass evacuation north toward Manchuria, where a sister cell can arm and hide them. Women, children, the oldest and youngest fighters, anyone who might, in a freer future, carry the memory of Joseon forward. Yun-san meets with Eugene one last time before the plan goes into motion. The meeting is quiet. Yun-san hands over a bag of pooled funds, contributions from Hina, from Hee-sung's mother, from dozens of other hidden hands, and asks Eugene to buy the tickets, because an American passport is the one remaining magic word at the train station. The plan requires 12 train tickets to Pyongyang. It requires a convincing cover story. It requires someone whose American passport can still buy those tickets without raising alarms at the station. It requires Eugene. Eugene buys the tickets the next day. Yun-san divides the survivors into 3 platoons. Ae-shin is to lead the train platoon. Eugene will travel with them as her American husband, using his uniform to smooth the group through Japanese checkpoints. Jun-young, now fully grown and fully a soldier, will disguise himself in a stolen Japanese uniform to cover the boarding from the platform side. The remaining fighters will move overland and cover the retreat. The night before they go, the righteous army gathers around a low fire in the hills. The children cry from hunger, and Ae-shin quietly gives them her own share of barley. Someone unfolds the Joseon flag Ae-shin sewed in secret months ago. A little boy trips running past and leaves a muddy handprint on the white cloth. The older comrades laugh and tease him for branding the flag with his own seal of patriotism. Then, slowly, almost without discussing it, the fighters begin dipping their fingers into the juice of crushed flower petals someone has found, and pressing their prints onto the flag one by one. The faint red-pink stain from a distance looks very much like blood. No one says so. Everyone sees it. Ae-shin, sitting by the fire, takes out the small wooden music box Eugene once gave her and lets it play Green Sleeves, the same tune that once made a freezing orphan boy weep in a New York alley years ago. The hills listen, the fighters listen, no one speaks. When the tune ends, Eugene arrives late, slips his own carefully folded Joseon flag into Unsan's, hands as a gift, and announces with a small unreadable smile that he is appointing himself the 4th platoon, a platoon of 1. Ae-shin notices in the firelight that her own fingers and Eugene's have matching pale pink stains, where they have both pressed their hands into the flag. She nudges him gently. He smiles at the stains. "I've never seen a man paint his fingernails," she teases in a whisper. "I learned it from a man in a mask," he whispers back. "It is the last joke either of them will make together." Back in Hanseong, Hee-sung finishes burying his archive behind the pawn shop with shaking hands. He pats the dirt down flat. He stands up. He brushes off his knees. He leaves a small note on the pawn shop counter for Il-shik and Chun-shik. "Please accept my pocket watch as payment for the rent I forgot to settle. H." He winds the watch one last time and places it gently on the shelf. Then he walks out of the pawn shop's back door and straight toward the Japanese police he already knows are waiting for him at the corner, because he has decided he would rather die as the author of a newspaper than live as his father's son. He does not run. He does not resist. When the officers sees him, he looks one of them in the face and smiles. At dawn the next morning, the train. Ae-shin boards with the refugees. Jun-young, in his stolen Japanese uniform, stands on the platform outside her window giving hand signals. Eugene slips onto the train at the last possible moment by casually latching onto a self-important Japanese baron whose name he happens to recognize. A man named Mori, who, in another life, once studied English on the same porch as Eugene in America. Eugene improvises his way past the station guards with the kind of sheer nerve only Eugene can manage, pretending to be an old friend, name-dropping people the Baron knows. The whistle blows, the train hisses, the station falls behind them. For 10 minutes, they almost believe they're going to make it. Then the Japanese soldiers on board begin a full compartment search for rebels. A sketch of Ae-shin's face is circulating through the cars. A small boy travelling with the righteous army, too young to understand secrecy, blurts out a dangerous word. The disguised tailor and nurse travelling with the group cover for him, smoothly in Japanese. The soldiers half believe them. The net is still closing. Eugene finds Ae-shin in her seat. He slides in beside her the way a husband slides in beside his wife after work. He checks his gun in his lap out of view of the aisle. 1 bullet, as always. He turns to her with his small familiar smile and tells her, with perfect mildness, that 1 bullet has always been enough for him. "I am the wife of an excellent American," she whispers back, and he squeezes her hand. They are both wearing their rings. Far away in a Japanese prison cell, Hee-sung is being beaten to death. A Japanese officer is demanding to know where the newspaper archive is buried. Hee-sung, through split lips and bloody teeth, smiles up at the man. "I only love beautiful and useless things," he says. "The moon, stars, flowers, smiles, jokes. If loving those things makes me a rebel, I'm honoured to be one." The officer hits him again. Hee-sung's pocket watch ticks in his coat pocket. Hee-sung closes his eyes. The watch keeps going after he stops. On the hills outside the train line, Yun-san's overland platoon runs straight into a Japanese ambush. Outnumbered, outgunned. They know it. Yun-san looks across at his fighters. The pottery maker turned commander, standing under a handprint-stained flag, and he says, almost conversationally, "It is not only the magnificent days that make history. We will lose. We will barely endure with our crude weapons. But we must fight anyway, and make it known that we were here, that we were afraid, and that we fought to the end even so." The righteous army charges up the slope with the handprint flag waving above them. The Japanese guns open fire. Yun-san is the last to fall. He is smiling faintly when he goes, because he's thinking of a 9-year-old boy he once sent away on a boat, and of the great quiet man that boy has grown into. And on the train, Eugene makes his calculation. He walks, casually, into the first-class car and takes the Japanese Baron hostage at gunpoint. He orders the soldiers to fall back. Ae-shin follows him with an empty weapon she prays they will not think to check. Eugene walks them step by step toward the front of the train, toward the tunnel, toward the coupler that connects Ae-shin's car to his. He talks the whole way, low and steady, so the soldiers will keep backing up. At the mouth of the tunnel, Eugene turns to Ae-shin. He tells her very quietly that this is his history and his love story. He tells her that her road goes forward as his step goes back. He asks her, one last time, with a small tired smile, not to cry. Then he takes one more look at her, at the pale pink handprint stain still faint on the inside of her wrist from the flag, at the ring on her finger, at the face of the only person in the world who ever learned his real name and used it kindly. And he orders the Japanese soldiers behind him to move forward into the next car. When they are all past the coupler, he raises his gun, aims at the metal pin between the two cars, and fires the single bullet he's been saving his whole life for. The cars separate inside the tunnel. Ae-shin runs to the back edge of her car, screaming his name. Not his American name, but his real one. The name his mother gave him at the well before she died. Choi Eugene. He hears it. He turns his head toward it. The Japanese soldiers open fire. The tunnel mouth ahead of her blooms with pale daylight as her half of the train races free of the dark. His half slows, drifts, and finally comes to a stop deep inside the mountain. In the dim, with blood on his uniform and his breath getting shorter, Eugene Choi lets his ring-bearing hand fall to his side. He thinks for an instant that feels very long about a music box in a New York alley, and about a woman who once asked him what his English name meant, and about a mother who once threw an ornament into the dirt at his feet and told him to live. He turns his face up. He looks at the narrow strip of sky visible through the tunnel's far end. That same kind of patch of sky a small servant boy was once told not to look up at, because the higher a servant looks, the shorter his life. He dies looking up. Guan-su, Eugene's long-suffering clerk and unlikely closest friend, walks into the Emperor's chamber a few days later with shaking hands and a folded paper in his fist. He reads aloud, slowly, the names of the righteous army dead. He reads Xionggu, he reads Yun-san, he reads the pawnshop brothers, and the tailor, and the nurse, and the small boy who whispered the wrong word on the train. He reads Hee-sung, he reads Dong-mei. And last, more quietly than any of the others, he reads Choi Eugene. The emperor of a country that has functionally ceased to exist sits on his cushion and weeps without making a single sound. At the language school, a young girl named Somi, once an orphaned hotel worker, now a student Eugene personally arranged to save, opens Eugene's travel bag. Inside she finds two things. One is his mother's gold ornament, the small piece flung at his feet in a courtyard when he was 9 years old and told to run far. The other is the black and white photograph from the Tokyo studio. Eugene and Ae-shin, unsmiling, unmistakable, held forever on a piece of glass by an old Japanese photographer who knew love when he saw it. Somi holds the picture in both hands and cries. Then she wipes her face and tucks the photograph carefully into the inside pocket of her coat. She's been given, without asking for it, the job of carrying it forward. A letter reaches Kyle Moore in America. Kyle reads it with his one good hand and bows his grey head for a long time. The letter asks only one thing, that Eugene be buried in the foreigners' cemetery in Gyeongseong, because Eugene was born in Joseon and lived as an American and died as a foreigner, and wished, at the end, to rest in a country that had never quite accepted him. Kyle writes back in his careful left-handed script that it will be done. Then, for the first time in years, he finishes the poem he's been writing. The last line is simply, "Let's go." He leaves the poem on his desk and goes for a walk. In the pawn shop, Il-shik and Chun-shik come home to find the note in Hee-sung's handwriting on the counter, offering his pocket watch as payment for the rent he never got around to settling. It is the closest thing to a suicide note the beautiful, unserious Hee-sung was ever going to write. The brothers stand there with the note in their hands for a long time, then they put the watch on the shelf. Over the following days, other small relics begin arriving at the shop, brought in by villagers who have heard what happened. Dongmei's curved sword, Yun-san's pottery, a single pair of a dead righteous army fighter's straw shoes, a half-burned printing plate from Hee-sung's press that someone dug up from the mud behind the pawn shop. Without meaning to, without anyone planning it, the dusty little pawn shop becomes the first museum of a war that was never formally declared. Inside a small medicine cabinet in the corner, Il-shik one day finds Eugene's wooden matryoshka doll, the nesting doll Eugene once used as a secret letterbox with Ae-shin. He opens it and finds, inside the smallest nested doll, one last folded letter. Eugene must have slipped it in there just before the trip to Japan, knowing it might be the last thing he ever wrote to her. Il-shik does not open it. He sets it aside carefully, and later, through careful channels, it finds its way north. The letter reads, "Our trip to Japan will likely be our farewell. Wherever you went, I always wanted to be with you. I didn't know you would make me say goodbye. Every step I took with you fulfilled my life. Every moment with you felt like a picnic. Oh, by the way, picnic starts with a P. It is a joke. A small, tender, absurd joke about the afternoon she misheard him by a riverbank and insisted the English word for fish started with a P. He is reminding her of one sunny day. He is reminding her that in the middle of a dying country they were, for one afternoon, two people who knew how to laugh at each other over a burned fish. "Are you still saving Joseon?" he writes. "Please do so." Ae-shin had a burning passion, and I loved that Ae-shin very much. Now I say goodbye. 2 years later, in the cold mountains of Manchuria, we find her. Ae-shin in a thick coat, her hair tied back, her hands calloused from a winter of rifles and rope, teaches a small knot of ragged young fighters how to shoot, vanish, and survive. Among them, a little taller now, a little harder, is Somi, who still carries the Tokyo photograph in her inside pocket. Ae-shin asks the cadets a question. "Once you shoot," she says, "your position is revealed. What do you do next?" Somi guesses, hopefully, "Shoot again." Ae-shin smiles the smallest, sharpest smile. It is the same sentence Shungu once asked her on a mountainside, above Hanseong a lifetime ago, and she gives it back to the next generation exactly the way she received it. "No," she says, "you run. Fast." She sends them sprinting up the ridge beneath the Joseon flag that is still stained with the little boy's muddy handprint and the faded pink of crushed flower petals. She stands at the bottom of the hill and watches her cadets go, and her face in that moment is the face of a woman who has nothing left to be afraid of. Over the image of those small figures scrambling up the slope, we hear her voice, older now, lower, steadier, delivering the words that are as close as this story ever gets to a blessing. These were brilliant days. We were all flames, blooming and wilting passionately. Now we burn our flames once more with the embers left by our comrades. Since my English never really improved, I will keep my farewell short. Goodbye, comrades. In our freed nation, see you again. Time equals 2.0 seconds / greater than. And then, one last image. The year is 1919. In the foreigners' cemetery in Gyeongseong, under a modest stone, a young man in a Joseon independent soldier's uniform stands quietly at attention in the cold morning light. We know him. He used to be a small boy named Domi, who once rode in Eugene's rickshaw, ran one of Eugene's errands, and grew up into a fighter because a half-American captain once told him, "This is your fight." Domi salutes the grave. Behind him, other young men in other worn independence uniforms salute with him. The stone is simple, the inscription is not. The greatest and noble one, still on a picnic here in Joseon. And so the story ends the way it began, with a boy looking up at the sky he was told not to look at, and with a country that refuses, against all odds and against all evidence, to lie down and die. If you have listened this far, you already know, in your bones, what Mr. Sunshine is really about. It is not, in the end, a love triangle, although it has one of the most devastating ones in Korean drama. It is not an action thriller, although it has breathtaking action. It is not even a story about Eugene Choi, although he gives it its title and its heart. It is a story about the moment when ordinary people, a pottery maker, two bickering pawnshop brothers, a hotelier widow, a fiancé who preferred moonlight to politics, a butcher's son with 2 swords, a gunner with a quiet grudge, a noblewoman with a secret English notebook, and a boy who once ran barefoot across a field with his mother's last command ringing in his ears, decide that their small, specific, individually unimportant lives are worth more when offered together than when kept apart. None of them win. That is the hardest part. Joseon falls, Japan comes. The colonial years are long and cruel, and longer than anyone in this story will live to see the end of. The independence their flame was meant to light will not arrive until 1945, decades after every single one of them is dust. And yet their story, this story, is the reason that flame did not go out in the dark. Somewhere in Manchuria tonight, a woman with sniper's calluses and a widow's rings is leading children up a ridge and telling them to run fast. Somewhere in Gyeongsong tonight, a young soldier is saluting a grave that has outlived 3 empires. And somewhere, on a riverbank that does not exist anymore, in a country that did not survive, a man who could not spell picnic is still trying to teach the woman he loves that the word begins with a P. Goodbye, Mr. Sunshine. In a freed nation, see you again.